The night was quiet, almost empty, yet the city's whispers had already arrived at the small training hall. 3 well-known instructors, each confident in their own mastery, had come with a single purpose: to test him. They expected confrontation, spectacle, perhaps even victory. But within 2 minutes, the sequence of events unfolded with a precision that left no room for argument. By the end, all 3 men, each a master in their own right, were standing together, heads lowered in unspoken acknowledgement. No theatrics. No struggle. Only the undeniable assertion of his quiet, absolute control. The question that remained for those who witnessed it was simple: how could such authority be asserted without a single aggressive gesture, yet leave its mark so completely? The streets of the city were quieter than usual that evening, but not empty. Neon signs flickered above narrow alleys, illuminating the doors of countless training halls. Within these walls, reputations were forged in silence, and mastery was measured not by words, but by what a student, or a teacher, could withstand and execute. 3 halls, each boasting a lineage that stretched decades back, were particularly well known. Their instructors were figures whose names carried weight in every conversation about martial arts. Each had developed a distinct style, an approach that demanded recognition, obedience, and, in some cases, awe. To enter their halls was to acknowledge the years of discipline behind the doors. Yet, in this network of hierarchy and tradition, there was one figure whose presence quietly unsettled the order. Bruce Lee. He had arrived in the city months prior, not as a challenger seeking glory, but as an observer of movement, of human potential, and of limitation. Stories about him had already begun to circulate: how he could read a man's balance in a glance, how his motion was economical to the point of invisibility, how, in brief encounters, he could assert control without ever needing to strike. That night, the atmosphere of the city's dojo circuit was subtly altered. The instructors were aware of his presence. The usual routines, salutes, warm-ups, displays of form, felt momentarily slower, heavier, as if the air itself anticipated the coming convergence. Bruce Lee did not announce himself. He did not raise voices or demand attention. He simply entered, observing each hall as one might observe a chessboard, noting not the students, but the posture of those in command. For the spectators who would later recount this night, it was clear from the start: something was different. This was not a typical display of rivalry, nor a demonstration for public amusement. This was a silent, deliberate test of skill and authority, played out in the quiet spaces where mastery was measured in restraint, not aggression. And in that stillness, the stage for an encounter unlike any before it was being set. By the time Bruce Lee reached the hall that evening, the challengers had already arrived. 3 instructors, each known for distinct styles and decades of experience, entered not as peers in camaraderie, but as masters preparing for a public assertion of authority. Their movements were measured, almost ceremonial: the subtle folding of sleeves, the adjustment of belts, the brief nod to one another, each action signaling readiness and confidence. The first, a striking master, carried the air of precision. Every step, every glance, suggested that his fists had defined reputations in countless bouts. The second, a grappling expert, exuded patience, his posture deliberate, his eyes scanning for weaknesses rather than striking opportunities. The third, an eclectic teacher who blended techniques from multiple disciplines, moved with quiet unpredictability, confident that adaptability would prove superior. They did not speak. Words were unnecessary, the hall itself absorbed their intentions. The instructors positioned themselves with deliberate spacing, maintaining both personal space and dominance. The air between them was taut, a lattice of expectation and ego, waiting for disruption. Bruce Lee did not respond with display or bravado. He walked in deliberately, his steps precise but unremarkable, his gaze calm. Where the instructors anticipated confrontation, they found only observation. A subtle shift in posture here, a slight adjustment there, he read each movement with a patience that made the challengers uneasy. They were accustomed to asserting authority through technique, through demonstration of strength or speed. Bruce Lee offered neither immediately. It was in this quiet exchange, before a single technique was attempted, that the first cracks in their certainty appeared. Each instructor, confident in their style, now confronted a presence that demanded recognition not through aggression, but through observation, timing, and anticipation. Those who later recounted the evening often remarked on this moment, that for the briefest interval, the instructors were not the masters they believed themselves to be. They were simply men being measured, their confidence weighed against a still, unspoken standard that could not be challenged with force alone. The assembly of challengers, prepared for spectacle, now found themselves participants in a different demonstration, one that would soon reveal that mastery could be silent and authority absolute without a single blow. Outside the hall, the streets had begun to hum with muted curiosity. Word of the gathering had spread quietly, carried by whispers among students, neighbors, and local martial artists. It was not a crowd that demanded spectacle, it was a crowd that sensed the weight of what was about to unfold. In the world of martial arts, reputation traveled faster than speed, and the presence of Bruce Lee alongside 3 established instructors was enough to make even seasoned observers pause. Inside, the atmosphere shifted subtly as more eyes fixed on the room. Students, assistants, and casual onlookers instinctively assumed the roles of witnesses to an unspoken ritual. Conversation ceased, attention narrowed. Every small movement, the adjustment of a stance, the sharpening of a gaze, was magnified in perception. Speculation filled the silence. Who would demonstrate dominance first? Would the challengers assert themselves together, or would a single instructor attempt to claim superiority? And Bruce Lee, what form would his mastery take? The uncertainty was deliberate. His reputation preceded him, yet no one truly knew how his skill would manifest in this context, against not 1 but 3 masters in the same room. The tension was not loud, it did not crackle with the energy of aggression. It was a quiet pressure, like air before a storm, measured and inevitable. Every observer felt it differently, some with awe, some with apprehension, some with the faint unease that comes when a long-held hierarchy faces an unexpected force. And then the moment arrived. The instructors, each poised and confident, subtly shifted their stances in unison. Bruce Lee mirrored no preparation, no flourish. He merely observed, breathing in rhythm with the space around him, unhurried, controlled. Those who would later recall the night spoke less about what they saw and more about what they felt, that in the span of mere seconds, anticipation had become understanding. They could sense the quiet inevitability that the events unfolding would not follow the script they expected, yet there was no panic, only the recognition of skill yet to be revealed. It was in this charged stillness that the scene was set for the demonstration that would leave all present, instructors and observers alike, in a rare, unanimous acknowledgement of mastery. The hall seemed to contract as Bruce Lee stepped forward. Not with aggression, but with the quiet confidence of someone who had no need to assert themselves through force. The instructors anticipated a conventional display, sparring, counters, perhaps even a brief struggle, but instead, they encountered something far subtler. He began with a simple movement, almost imperceptible, a shift of weight, the tiniest adjustment in stance. Observers later noted that it was not speed that defined the moment, but timing. Every motion was economical, precise, measured to the smallest detail. There was no flourish, no effort wasted, each gesture served a purpose that only became apparent when it had been completed. The first instructor lunged, testing his power against Bruce Lee. The encounter lasted barely a heartbeat. Lee's response was minimal, a subtle redirection, a precise alignment of body and balance, and the result was immediate. The instructor stumbled slightly, not struck, but controlled. There was no anger, no humiliation, only a quiet acknowledgement in his posture that something had shifted. The second moved differently, attempting to grapple, to impose his technique through weight and leverage. Again, Bruce Lee's mastery was revealed in restraint. He allowed momentum to carry the challenger into positions from which retreat or yield was the only natural choice. No struggle. No resistance. Only the efficient assertion of authority through understanding of physics, timing, and human mechanics. The third approached with unpredictability, blending multiple styles in rapid succession. Bruce Lee responded with the same calm detachment. His body remained open, his eyes observant, his movements minimal yet decisive. Each attempt to dominate was met with a silent adjustment, a repositioning that preserved control without confrontation. For the witnesses, it was almost imperceptible at first. Then they saw the pattern. None of the instructors could impose themselves. Each move was anticipated, each action absorbed, each challenge neutralized without a single aggressive gesture. The mastery was in what was not done. There was no shouting, no dramatic strikes, no theatrics. Yet the effect was complete, undeniable. By the time 2 minutes had passed, the demonstration had concluded. The instructors, masters in their own right, stood together, unspoken agreement in their posture, heads lowered. Bruce Lee had not fought them in the conventional sense. He had simply moved with authority, read their intentions, and asserted control through absolute efficiency. And in that quiet mastery, the room understood, authority need not roar. Skill need not display itself in spectacle. Control, once perfected, becomes inevitable. The moment had passed, yet the weight of it lingered in the hall. The 3 instructors, who had entered with full confidence in their styles, now faced an unsettling clarity. Their minds worked to reconcile what they had seen, skill that did not rely on brute strength, authority that did not demand spectacle, dominance achieved without confrontation. Each man reacted differently, but the result was the same. The striking master, who had relied on speed and precision, found his usual certainty undermined. He adjusted his stance again and again, searching for a moment he could claim as advantage, yet every attempt was anticipated and absorbed. There was no physical defeat, only the subtle acknowledgement that he had been measured, and found wanting, in a way that left no room for argument. The grappling expert, accustomed to controlling through leverage and patience, felt a shift in his perception of control itself. He had anticipated struggle, resistance, negotiation of power, yet none occurred. Bruce Lee's minimal movements had rendered him unnecessary. His strength, though intact, had no opportunity to manifest in the way he understood mastery. The eclectic 3rd instructor, who had prided himself on unpredictability and adaptation, realized that adaptability alone could not overcome observation paired with absolute control. Each feint, each combination, was met with restraint, absorbed silently, leaving him without recourse. And then, as if by instinct, their heads lowered simultaneously. It was not a gesture dictated by protocol or public expectation, but by a recognition deeper than words. They had encountered mastery beyond display, beyond competition, beyond challenge. They bowed, not in fear, nor in theatrical submission, but in acknowledgement of the authority Bruce Lee had asserted in silence. For the witnesses, the impact was profound. The air that had been taut with anticipation now seemed to exhale collectively. They saw not humiliation, but clarity. The instructors were intact, their dignity preserved, yet their certainty had shifted. Control had been demonstrated not through victory in combat, but through the quiet recalibration of respect and understanding. No one left the hall speaking. None needed to. The lesson had been communicated in the subtle shifts of posture, in the absence of struggle, in the inevitability of recognition. In those 2 minutes, a long-held hierarchy had quietly collapsed, leaving a new order defined by skill, restraint, and perception. Years later, those who had witnessed the night still spoke of it in the same quiet, measured tone. The instructors had returned to their own halls, teaching students, demonstrating techniques, preserving the forms they had honed for decades. Yet none ever recounted the evening as a defeat. Instead, they spoke of it as a lesson, a demonstration of mastery that transcended their understanding of combat. Bruce Lee himself moved on, as he always had, quietly refining his craft, observing, teaching, and embodying principles that spoke louder than any strike. The story of that night spread slowly, not as a spectacle of triumph, but as a reference point for what skill, control, and perception could achieve. Those who had trained under the 3 instructors began to hear fragments of the tale, whispered with reverence, how restraint could outweigh aggression, how observation could impose authority more effectively than force. The incident became legend not because of the confrontation itself, but because of its subtlety. Martial artists, historians, and those who had studied Bruce Lee's methods recognized that mastery was not about public acclaim or victory in a match, it was about understanding the limits of human motion, the psychology of confidence, and the quiet assertion of skill. In the years that followed, each of the instructors integrated the lesson into their own teaching, shaping generations of students in ways that could not be measured by wins or losses. The bow, simultaneous and unspoken, remained a symbol, less of submission, more of comprehension. It spoke of an authority that required no announcement, a control that needed no proof, and a legacy that endured precisely because it had left no spectacle behind. For those who had witnessed it firsthand, and for those who came to hear of it later, the lesson was simple: true mastery does not shout. It is recognized in the smallest movements, the quietest adjustments, and the inevitable acknowledgement of those who encounter it. And in that quiet, the story persists, an enduring reminder that skill tempered by restraint leaves a mark far deeper than force ever could. The hall itself, long since emptied of that night's crowd, remains a silent witness in memory. The echoes of authority linger not in noise, but in the unspoken understanding that mastery, when fully realized, cannot be challenged, it can only be recognized.